Yes! We get to close escrow! But what does that mean? Hey folks, welcome back to Real Estate Investing Unmasked. We're going to talk about closing escrow, which is the last step in how to buy a house. If you've watched my other 10 videos, I really thank you for that. If you haven't yet, go take a look up above and we'll get you started on that list. Closing escrow. First of all, let's revisit, what does escrow even mean? Escrow is a process of bringing a third party into the transaction, and it's a good thing. For instance, when you have somebody on this side that's a seller of a good and somebody that's on this side that's a buyer of a good, usually in most transactions, I give you money, you give me the good, we're good to go. However, in the process of real estate transaction, there's so much involved. It's not just one party, it's not just two parties, it's like 6 or 7 parties. It's a lot of people that are involved. You got the agents on both sides, that's 2 people that are going to get paid. The person that the seller owes money to, that's the lender, so they're involved. You have the seller that's involved, you have the buyer that's involved, you have the buyer's mortgage broker that's involved, so that's 6 people right there. Then you got all the other people that actually record the information. That's 7. So we got about 7 people already involved in this, and possibly even more. So escrow, what it does is it allows one person or a group or a company to say, give me all of your stuff, give me all of your stuff, let's combine it into one location, and then I will switch it out and give everybody what they are supposed to get. Closing escrow is literally the moment when all of that happens, when everything exchanges hands. When the seller has given the title of the property to escrow so they can put it in your name and it's been recorded as the buyer, that's when you've closed. For the seller, it's when the money shows up in their bank account. That's when they've closed. So usually it's wired to them, so they've got the money in their bank account. The real estate agents on both sides get their commission. The county or the city or whatever jurisdiction that you're in, province maybe, they record it on their record books. That's when it's closed. Everything happens simultaneously. We know it all happens around the same time, but it's simultaneously as far as everybody is concerned. So escrow is just simply a way of bringing like minds together and letting them exchange all the goods without having a take in it other than their fee to perform the transaction. One of the things that stopped eBay really early on in its game was they needed to have some way to accept payments and have some way for you to get the goods. The hardest part with eBay way back when they first started was people didn't want to send the good until they got a check in the mail. You know, there was no PayPal at the time. As soon as there was a PayPal where you could make the payment and eBay could have the payment and they could confirm that you got the goods, then they would release that payment. eBay essentially was an escrow company. All about bidding. Yes, it's an auction, but it's all about escrow. It's about having somebody in the middle that says, give me what you got, and I'll switch it. Okay, so that's escrow. So when do I get the keys? As the buyer, what happens is your agent is supposed to meet with the escrow agent, who is supposed to meet with the seller's agent to get the keys. Now the seller is supposed to be able to give those keys several days in advance. By now they should have moved out already. You should have done your walkthrough, your final walkthrough, to be able to go in the property, but they didn't give you the keys to go inside the house on your own for that final walkthrough. At least most agents don't. So the keys at that point would be given to the escrow company, or they'd be held onto by the real estate agent that represents the buyer. Then whenever escrow is closed and the escrow officer says everything's done, that's when the buyer's agent can hand over the keys or the combination code or whatever it is to the person who just bought the house. The seller gets all the money that they have left over after they pay their mortgage, and that's also the moment that you as the buyer get locked in on the mortgage on your property. Now for the most part, when you get a loan, you've already prepaid for the first month's payments. So if you're closing on the 2nd of the month, you won't have to make a payment until not the next month, the month after that on the 1st, usually. Depends on whatever you've arranged with your lender, but most often you've paid the first month's worth of interest, a prorated amount of interest, so you don't have to make that first payment on the 1st of the coming month. That's normal. Now there are some ways that you can push off closing. There are some obligations. For instance, we talked about this in the previous example. Let's say that you did your final walkthrough, or what you expected to be your final walkthrough, and when you got there, not everything was fixed that you had agreed upon to have fixed. Well, that's when you say, hey guys, let's push out closing a little bit more and we'll close a little bit later. That's how you would extend closing. You could also have an extension of closing if there was bad weather and the people that were supposed to do everything to get it closed couldn't get to be where they were supposed to be. You could also have a situation where the rate for your mortgage for the buyer was locked in, but the rate lock, it expired. So now the financer has to go through all the rigmarole again to get you approved or to get it extended for another couple of days for you to get that rate locked in. And sometimes that costs you an extra $400, $500, $600 depending on your mortgage broker and how they have it structured. The other thing that could cause a closing to extend too long would be seller contingencies or buyer contingencies. For instance, a seller could say, hey, I'm leasing the property back from you, so you could close escrow, but they still have control of the property. They still have control of the keys because that's what you agreed upon. You could also have an extension if the buyer says, hey, my contingency is we're not going to close until I sell my old house, so I do have the money to put in as closing on this house, and it hasn't sold yet. So those would be contingencies that also could push closing out a little bit further. The last thing you want to do is they're going to send you a statement, a HUD statement, HUD-1, a HUD-1 statement. And on that statement, it's going to have all these fees, all the things that you paid, all the things that the seller received, and whether you're the buyer or the seller, you want to keep that HUD statement because that's what you use in America to write off stuff on your taxes. There are a lot of expenses that you can write toward expenses on your taxes so you can get a little bit bigger tax return. After all, a lot of times people buy a house so they can have a larger tax return because they write off the interest that they're paying toward the lender. That's something that's in the tax code. As the primary residence, that you can write off interest towards your income as long as you're making a certain amount. And if you need that information, talk to your tax person, but the HUD-1 is that piece of paper you're going to need to give to them. All right, folks, thanks for watching. I hope you learned something today. The next video I'm going to do, even though it's not necessarily part of this series, is what do you do now that escrow is closed? Now that you own the property, what are the first things you should do whenever your property closes? When I have that video out, I'll have the link up above so you can check that out. Or I'll have it here on the closing screen. Don't forget to subscribe. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll see you next time.